Imagine a city built on marble and vice. Rome, crowned in gold, bathed in sunlight, drunk on its own glory. Senators praise virtue by day and sell their souls by night. And in the heart of this empire walks a girl barely 15, wrapped in silk, crowned in violets, promised to the most powerful man alive. Her name would one day become a curse whispered through centuries, Valeria Messalina. To the crowds, she was purity reborn, the empress meant to heal the sins of Caligula's Rome. But behind those calm eyes burned something darker: desire, defiance, the hunger to rule not through armies or laws, but through the oldest weapon of all, sex. Within a few short years, this girl would seduce senators, humiliate generals, and bring an empire to its knees. Rome had conquered the world. She would conquer Rome. But every empire that rises on pleasure eventually drowns in it. This is not just the story of one woman's lust. It's the story of how desire turned to power, and power devoured its queen. In 38 CE, Rome shone beneath the Mediterranean sun, convinced its glory would never fade. Temples blazed white, statues glimmered like gods, and the empire believed itself eternal. Yet beneath that perfection, corruption grew. Into this world stepped 15-year-old Valeria Messalina, wed to Emperor Claudius, an aging ruler mocked for his limp and stammer, yet feared for the imperial seal he held. Their marriage was paraded as divine renewal, incense rising to Juno, music echoing through marble halls, the young bride draped in moon-white silk. To Rome she was innocence crowned, but behind her smile flickered cold intelligence, a will that would one day unmake the empire that adored her. Messalina soon became the living emblem of Roman virtue, the emperor's wife, mother of his heirs, flawless in grace. Poets praised her, senators bowed, the people worshipped her beauty. Yet under the silken jewels, restlessness festered. Rome demanded purity. She craved rebellion. When night fell, the goddess of virtue vanished into the filth of the Suburra. Disguised in rags, painted like a common woman, she slipped through alleys thick with smoke and laughter. There, amid drunk soldiers and broken souls, the Empress of Rome sold herself for sport, not for pleasure but for power. Every man who touched her became her subject, every sin her victory. By dawn, she returned to the palace washed clean, the perfect wife once more. Rome worshipped a mask. Only the darkness knew the truth. As days passed, the palace itself became her playground of ruin. Banquets meant for celebration turned into theaters of humiliation. Senators reclined on golden couches, terrified of what she might command next. Gladiators, slaves, even noble youths, none were spared her games. Each feast ended deeper in shame, until Messalina faced Rome's most famous courtesan in a contest of endurance. When dawn came, her rival collapsed in defeat. The empress stood victorious, crowned not by applause, but by silence, the silence of men too afraid to speak. In that moment Rome understood. Its empress had transformed virtue into spectacle, lust into law. Pleasure became weaponry. In a hidden villa near the Campus Martius, Messalina built an empire of secrets. Behind silk curtains, senators and noblewomen surrendered to her will. Every whisper, every trembling confession was recorded by servants loyal only to her. Those who entered seeking delight left enslaved by shame. She ruled not through legions, but through fear. Blood dries, one soldier murmured, but shame never does. From that villa she blackmailed governors, bent generals, and bought loyalty with silence. Rome's proudest men became puppets. The empire's heart beat not for its emperor, but for the woman who owned their disgrace. Her vanity soon demanded worship. Cloaked in gold and roses, she appeared as Venus reborn, commanding priests and nobles to join blasphemous rituals. Music throbbed through the night. Incense drowned reason. Sacred rites twisted into orgies of laughter and mockery. Those who refused her vanished. Those who obeyed lost their souls. She poured wine over altars, declaring herself goddess of Rome, not of virtue, but of desire. Even priests of Jupiter bowed in fear. In the flicker of torches, she seemed divine indeed, radiant and terrible. Rome had not been conquered by war, but by worship. Its citizens now knelt before their own corruption. But an empire of indulgence cannot stay hidden forever. The whispers began softly, first in the marble halls of the Palatine, then in the Senate, then in the barracks of the legions that guarded Rome's frontiers. The stories were unbelievable, obscene even, and yet they carried the weight of truth. Rome's empress, the woman crowned as virtue itself, had become the shadow that ruled its soul. Messalina's feasts were no longer secrets. Her villa no longer a private den, but the very heartbeat of corruption. Every senator who feasted with her knew the risk. One glance from her, one word whispered by a servant, and their honor could vanish overnight. The mighty who once gave orders now trembled before her smile. Even Claudius, Emperor of Rome, master of legions, keeper of law, seemed blind, or perhaps afraid. Some said he loved her too deeply to see. Others whispered that she had reduced even him to silence, binding him not with chains, but with shame. The empire that once lived by discipline and duty now moved to the rhythm of her desires. Far beyond the capital, soldiers began to murmur in the camps. Rumors of her night rituals, of generals stripped of dignity, of priests made to dance in mockery of their gods. For the Roman soldier, pride was worth more than life, and honor was sacred. To know their empress laughed at both broke something deep within the ranks. Commanders hesitated to give orders, fearing their names already belonged to her secret ledgers. The Senate avoided confrontation. Rome's heart, the cold, unshakable core that had conquered the world, was cracking. The city still glittered by day, its temples bright and unbroken, its banners fluttering in the wind. But by night, every marble shadow whispered her name. Messalina had discovered a weapon sharper than any legion's sword. She didn't conquer provinces or cities. She conquered souls. She learned that humiliation, once planted, grew like poison ivy through the human spirit. Blood could be washed away. Shame never could. Her dominion was not marked on maps, but carved into men's memories, and so Rome's collapse began, not with an enemy at its gates, but within its own walls. Loyalty turned to silence. Bravery curdled into fear. The empire still looked invincible, but its heart was hollowed out, eaten alive by one woman's appetite. Messalina had proven a truth older than Rome itself. No empire falls by the sword until it first rots from within. By the year 48 CE, the empress who had once ruled through whispers no longer feared the light. Messalina's hunger had outgrown secrecy. The villa that once trembled with her midnight feasts now felt too small to contain her madness. She had conquered senators, priests, and generals. Even the emperor himself had become a puppet in her silken hands. But power, like any addiction, demands stronger doses, and so she reached for the one thing Rome would never forgive: open defiance of its gods, its laws, and its throne. When Emperor Claudius departed for Ostia to oversee public works, the city exhaled, unaware that within those breaths, history was about to choke. Messalina gathered her inner circle, the priests she had corrupted, the courtiers she owned, and one man whose ambition mirrored her own, Gaius Silius. He was young, handsome, a senator with the face of Apollo and the arrogance of a god. To him, she whispered promises of shared divinity. To her followers, she promised immortality through rebellion. What she truly desired was not love, but a coronation. The invitations went out under imperial seals. The guests, unaware, arrived in their finest robes, believing it another feast in honor of the gods. But when they entered the marble atrium, they froze. The torches burned low. Musicians played the solemn hymns of marriage. And there, at the center of the hall, stood Messalina, draped in a gown of ivory silk that shimmered like moonlight. Her golden hair was woven with violets, the flower of fertility, the same symbol she had worn at her wedding to Claudius years before. Beside her stood Silius, dressed as a groom. The priests of Rome, men who once served Jupiter, now stood trembling as they recited the sacred vows. Every gesture, every rite was performed exactly as tradition demanded. The clasped hands, the blessing of the gods, the exchange of rings. Only one thing was missing: the emperor himself, still alive and ruling elsewhere. What unfolded was not love. It was treason. A living empress marrying another man while her husband sat upon the throne. The crowd watched in silence, horror and fascination intertwining in their throats. Some thought it a ritual, a drunken jest, a symbolic act of decadence. Others saw the truth, a declaration of power. Messalina wasn't merely betraying her husband. She was proclaiming herself greater than him, greater than the empire, greater than the gods. As the vows ended, she smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that gleamed like a blade. The hall was silent except for the crackle of torches and the shiver of silk. The priests blessed the union. Contracts were signed, witnesses sealed their names in wax, and the impossible became law. Rome's empress had wed another man in daylight, before its priests and nobles, beneath the same gods who had once guarded the empire. The streets outside buzzed with disbelief. Senators fled their homes, priests tore their robes, citizens whispered that the gods would strike Rome before dawn. The empire trembled, not from war or rebellion, but from the audacity of one woman who dared to rewrite its sacred order. In that moment, Messalina crossed the final threshold. She was no longer human in her own mind, no longer the young bride who once smiled beneath violets. She was something else now, a force of destruction wearing a goddess's crown. To her, the wedding was not betrayal. It was ascension, the ultimate act of defiance against everything that had tried to cage her, and as the sun set behind the Palatine Hill, the bells of her forbidden marriage echoed through the streets of Rome, tolling not for love, but for doom. The empress, who had once seduced the empire, now stood poised to destroy it. The wedding bells had barely faded when the truth reached Ostia. At first Claudius laughed. It was too absurd to believe. His wife, the Empress of Rome, marrying another man while he still breathed. It had to be gossip, another palace rumor spun by jealous courtiers. But then came the witnesses, priests pale with terror, officials carrying contracts sealed with the imperial mark. There could be no denial. Rome's ruler had been mocked before his gods, his senate, and his own people. The laughter died in his throat and turned to rage. The emperor's orders were swift. Soldiers marched for the capital. Behind them trailed the fury of a betrayed empire. In Rome, panic ignited like dry tinder. Senators tore their robes and burned evidence of loyalty to her. Servants fled the palace. The same courtiers who once knelt before Messalina now cursed her name. Silius, the man she had called her husband, was dragged through the streets and executed before sunset. His blood washed the marble steps of the Forum, a silent warning that no one, not even a lover of the Empress, was safe from vengeance. And Messalina, the goddess of Rome, the mistress of its sin, the woman who had ruled the hearts of men, was found hiding in the gardens of her palace, the same gardens that had once echoed with laughter, music, and the scent of wine now stood deathly still. The woman who had made emperors tremble now knelt, trembling herself, her silk gown torn, her hair tangled, her crown of roses crushed into the dirt. She begged for mercy, pleaded for her children, even tried to end her life. But the hand that had once ruled Rome faltered when faced with her own death. The soldiers hesitated for a moment. Even they seemed haunted by the sight, this fallen empress who had once enslaved them all without a sword. But orders are orders. A nameless soldier stepped forward. One swift strike, and the empire's most feared woman fell silent. Her blood darkened the earth beneath the flowers she once wore as her crown. By nightfall, the emperor commanded her name erased. Statues smashed, portraits burned, scrolls destroyed. Damnatio memoriae, the curse of oblivion. Rome pretended she had never existed, but history remembers what empires try to bury. Her story still clings to the stones of the Palatine, whispered by the wind through the ruins, a warning carved in silence. Messalina had everything the world could offer: beauty, power, luxury, and worship. But in her hunger to possess more, she devoured herself. Her greatest weapon became her undoing. Power gained through desire always ends in destruction, because the moment you believe you are untouchable, you are already falling. That is the moral of her story. Empires don't collapse in a single night. They rot from within, one secret, one sin, one indulgence at a time. And when the last marble cracks, we finally see that it wasn't war that ended them. It was human desire. If this story made you think about the darker side of power and the cost of desire, then show your support. Like the video so more people can uncover these forgotten tales of history. Comment below what you think truly destroyed Rome. Was it greed, lust, or something deeper within the human heart? And subscribe to the channel for more stories where power, beauty, and tragedy collide, because history never forgets those who tried to play gods.